Hi, I'm Chris McHale, and I'm CEO of SBK and Associates. I am here with Mike Solinap. He's our Director of DevOps and Cloud Operations. Hi, Mike.
Hello.
We're here to talk about DevOps and startups and how startups can tap into the whole DevOps philosophy and also tool stack and operations that go along with it. We at SBK have helped a number of companies get going on this pretty quickly, and it's a lot of fun. And we just like to talk about some of the things that we've seen, some of the lessons that we've learned, and Mike is here to help us with that. Does it sound good, Mike?
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Okay, good. So, Mike, you've experienced in the world of hard knocks here some of these different startup clients that we have. And you've actually implemented DevOps from kind of start to finish with a few of them from the very beginning. Is that right?
That's right. And I think despite, each of the customers that we've worked with, their requirements being vastly different, I think there's some common underlying processes or things that we can identify that we've seen across all of our customers. And for example, with the tooling, we've seen that the Atlassian suite works quite well for getting folks right off the ground. There's nothing to install. We can sign up for a tenant pretty quickly and get folks up and running, with really a minimal amount of effort. And then we can configure as we go on, to tailor that set of applications to their specific processes and workflows.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I've noticed that from my perspective is a huge help to a startup or small company getting going with developing software is that they've got the developers, of course, in-house, or they may have some contractors, but at any rate, they've got the developers in-house. They've got a designer usually in-house. And those are very specific skill sets, of course, depending on what they're coding in that startup needs. But when you get over to the DevOps side, there's actually a pretty wide array of skills that are required in order to set up that whole, what we call the software factory, right? But to set up that whole life cycle with the tools that are required. That to me is one of the best benefits of doing this more as a managed service for the startup. Is that what you found too? I mean, that's just been my observation. And tell me what you think about that.
That's right. I think in order to get going as a startup, you require a lot of different roles, and you have to wear several different hats. And when you end up working with a group like SBK, we have that expertise, and we're willing to put on and wear those many different hats. And we've got experience with several different roles, so we can get folks up and running very quickly because of that.
Yeah. Would you say that we have almost a whole platform of tools that we can introduce into that situation and then fold that in really seamlessly with the software developers? And you mentioned Jira and Atlassian, but what are some of the other tools that are in this platform that you use?
Yeah, so in addition to Jira for bug tracking and issue management, we also work really closely with Confluence for documentation. And then in terms of DevOps, there's a heavy reliance on the build release process. And so from Atlassian, we work a lot with Bitbucket for source code management, as well as Bitbucket pipelines, which is really nice because then we don't have to stand up any servers. We don't have to manage any servers. Really, we make use of the build release process as a service, and we can get up and running, super quickly.
And what about on the infrastructure as code side? What are some of the tools and things that you're using there?
Yeah, so we have a lot of experience in using Terraform. Terraform works really well. We've done some cloud-specific infrastructure as code, such as CloudFormation. But what we find is that Terraform is a little bit more agnostic and easier to work with and a little bit more extensible. It has some integrations to some other platforms that we you're not necessarily vendor locked in. So we find that Terraform works really well.
Mhm. And then more generally, I think, how does the team fold in and really partner with the development and design team that's at a startup? How does that work? Is it, I mean, do they feel like separate teams? Are they, because of course that's violates the philosophy of DevOps, right? How does that work, and how do you specifically make sure that that team is really integrated and tightly connected in?
Yeah, so we embed our staff, completely in the process, meaning, our folks are involved with the agile scrum meetings, stand-ups. We're involved in every bit of their process. That way, whether it's a technical task that needs to be done by someone on the development team, or if that ends up being something that is, for example, a little bit more operational, we can easily hand that off and understand what those requirements are, and make sure that it's done either way.
I mean, one thing that I've noticed is we'll take you'll at the beginning of a site of a startup or starting a software lifecycle like this. Obviously, there's bumps in the road. Everything is initially, a lot of things are done manually, and then we work really hard to just start automating one thing after another. Often just incrementally, but sometimes there's a bunch of automation we can bring to the table initially. That's a lot of process work as well. It's not just the tool. So how do you, what do we do relative to process, or how do we interact with process and provide guidance on process to the clients?
Yeah, I think in terms of process, what we do is kind of akin to writing pseudocode. We kind of just do everything manually and then write down what our steps are, right? And then from there, you can kind of see, okay, what are the long poles, or what do we need to tackle first in terms of automation? What would save us the biggest amount of time?
Right.
Because what we've found is that if you kind of just start with automating things, you can go down some very deep rat holes, and they may not necessarily save you a whole bunch of time, right? So
Right.
we start with a manual process after understanding what the requirements are up front, and then we start chipping away at some of the low hanging fruit, making sure that we can iterate and do things incrementally.
I've often seen that one size does not fit all, because depending on the software that's being developed, depending on the team, depending on where they are, there are not every team needs the same platform exactly produced the same way. I mean, there's definitely shifts and changes and customizations that need to happen. And that whole idea of what you just mentioned relative to what do you automate, that's a huge question, because picking and choosing which processes or systems to automate first is part of the genius of it, I think, because otherwise you can, as you mentioned, spend a lot of time going down rabbit holes that don't really improve your overall cycle. Yeah.
That's right.
Do you have any good stories that you can tell about a story rather that you can tell about a particular problem or obstacle or challenge, at any of our clients that illustrate some of the work that we do, and how it help?
Yeah, I think in terms of the build release process, I have a good story. One customer that we're working with right now, they initially wanted to jump straight into using Jenkins. So for those of you that don't know, Jenkins is an open source build release tool. And it's really the Swiss Army knife of build release tools, because you can pretty much do anything you want with it. And it's very flexible. And it comes at no cost, at least in terms of licensing. But what it does come with is a cost in terms of labor, because you do have to configure all of that. So this customer had started off on Jenkins, and they found that they were spending a whole lot of time just getting the very basics set up, when they didn't need all of that, right? And they just wanted to do a basic Java build, and do a basic deployment to AWS and Elastic Beanstalk. So what we found was that it really made more sense to pull away from that and move towards something that was maybe a little bit less flexible, a little bit more rigid. We brought them into Bitbucket pipelines. And for the past, I think, year and a half, they've been leveraging Bitbucket pipelines. Their builds, they can do multiple builds in parallel. There's not really a whole lot of configuration. In fact, the pipeline configuration can be checked out by any developer. It can be inspected and modified by any person. So it's very easy from a developer perspective to work with Bitbucket pipelines. And what we're seeing right now is that we're only starting to see the limits of what Bitbucket pipelines can do, but that's just the way that software development goes. As your needs get more and more complex, then maybe your tools aren't up to snuff anymore. So perhaps within the next 6 months, we'll start looking at moving them over to Jenkins again to kind of overcome some of those barriers and constraints that we have with Bitbucket pipelines. But so far, it's been working out for them well, and I think it's a good story about not trying to customize or have the most optimal solution right up front. It's kind of, in terms of startups that we're talking about here, getting your code out there as quick as possible and not being dragged down by tools.
Right. It's picking sort of the right tool for the right time, knowing that you are going to have to graduate to something else, and so you want to be implementing what you've got now with that in mind. And it's always a little bit of a balancing act, but yeah, absolutely. A lot of technical people get infatuated with the latest, greatest, bright, shiny object, and that isn't always the best thing for that particular team. And to keep your eyes completely fixated on how do we get this piece of software developed and out the door and released, as bug-free as possible and as rapidly as possible, is always the business objective. Got to keep that uppermost in mind. It's easy to get distracted sometimes, but
that's right.
Of course, there. Let's see. And then in terms of scaling, so the software companies, the startup companies that are fortunate and get to the point where something starts to take off, what can you say about scaling with a DevOps Managed Services company? How does that work, and does that work? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think scalability is a really tough challenge. And again, in the spirit of being a quick startup, trying to go as far as you can with a monolithic, for example, single node environment, taking that as far as you can always helps in terms of keeping things simple, because you don't necessarily want to add on that complexity right up front and have to worry about that before you have the customers, right? So as you gain that customer base, then I think you need to, start looking at, some areas that where your system should be scaling, right? So for example, your database scalability, right? Moving from a single point of failure for your database to something a little bit more HA and resilient. But that comes with challenges, because then you have technical issues to worry about in terms of data consistency and things of that nature. So I think at a high level, we're just a little bit more pragmatic about, again, timing of those features and enhancements to support scaling for a large number of customers.
Okay.
Yeah.
One other question that I probably want to end with here, because we can't have this conversation without talking about AI at all, and the impact that it's having on the DevOps tool set, as well as, of course, software development itself. I try to keep up with, nobody can keep up completely, but I try to keep up as much as possible with the tools that are getting developed and the overall change that's happening. And the developers, of course, many of them are developing with Copilot these days of some sort. There are tools that are popping up now that looks like you can take a design in Figma and you can actually push it through a tool and it will produce code for you. I mean, it's just crazy that the rapidity, velocity of the change that is going on. What do you, if you had to guess, just even the next couple of years in the area of DevOps and development in general, what do you think it's going to look like, if you can tell? What do you think we should all be doing in order to prepare for this and be able to evolve with it?
Yeah, I think there initially is, for very good reason, a lot of resistance to using these AI platforms, just because of the trust factor, right? It's very new. We don't quite know where our data is going, but I think in the terms of a startup environment that lends itself to working with either new platforms or new products or new coding, scripting languages, we've got to embrace it, because they'll just help us accelerate our productivity so much quicker. We may need to pick up a new type of framework or a new coding language, and we don't necessarily have the time to sit down, read a book, study it, become proficient in it. So I think adopting these AI platforms is going to help us really get that code out quicker, and produce some better software.
Yeah, I mean, the way I view it is a huge a part of this is the resistance that you're talking about, because for a lot of people, especially developers, it looks like a very threatening thing, and it is threatening to some degree. But what I think the developers that are going to come out of this stronger need to do is figure out how to use it as a tool. Just like any other tool, that's not entirely true. It's different than another tool, but we need to use it like a tool. So if a Copilot will help us code faster, then use Copilot to code faster. If there's a tool that will take a Figma design and at least produce what I call a first draft of code, then let's try that, and then code review it and figure out what needs to change. I mean, we know these things are not going to be perfect. We know they're going to make mistakes, but I liken it a little bit to, if you wrote, think back to school and writing a paper. I mean, if you're looking at a blank screen or a blank page, it's always harder to get started. But if you can feed some information to, in this case, if you're writing something at ChatGPT and it can produce a draft, or it can produce even an outline that you can then work off of, translate that back into the software world, you're going to be a lot faster and you're going to do better. So I think I concur with what you're saying about really having to just embrace it and figure out, how do I use this? How do I make me better? Whether it's on the software side or on the DevOps side. I think all of these tools, I know Atlassian's already starting to work some AI into Confluence as an example. And there's just going to be, all of this is going to get worked into all of these DevOps tools as well. I'm sure you'll see it in Terraform as well, if it isn't even there already. So, yep, I think that's the name of the game right now, and nobody knows how this is going to end up, but that's how we have to walk down this road, is eyes open and experimenting constantly. That's, I think, the name. The word of the day is experiment. All right, well, wonderful, Mike. Thanks for joining us and taking some time out of your day. Really appreciate your thoughts.